Okay, so today we're diving deep into Amazon EC2. It's amazing, to think about how accessible this kind of computing power is these days. Like anyone can basically have a supercomputer at their fingertips now.
Right. And not just that, it's the flexibility too. We're talking about essentially having a virtual data center that you can scale up or down. It's mind-blowing when you think about all the overhead and complexity that EC2 eliminates.
Yeah, it's not just renting a server anymore. It's like this whole other level of, well, what did you call it? Elasticity, where you can adapt to basically anything.
Exactly. Elasticity is the key. Imagine instead of, buying a car and then needing a truck later, you can just get the right vehicle for each task. Need a scooter for a quick trip? Done. Need to haul a bunch of stuff? No problem. You can grab a truck. It's that kind of on-demand access with EC2.
That's such a good analogy. So like having a whole fleet of virtual machines at your disposal, ready to go. Speaking of which, this Amazon documentation keeps mentioning instances. What exactly does that mean for someone using EC2?
An instance, it's basically your own little virtual server, your own computer, but it lives in Amazon's data centers. Think of it like a super-powered remote desktop, but with all the bells and whistles.
So I'm essentially logging into this remote instance and do my work there.
Exactly. It's yours to customize, Choose your operating system, install your software, whatever you need. Amazon provides the foundation, and you build your dream setup on top of it.
And that's where all these different instance types come in, right? I saw
Yeah.
there's a whole bunch of them listed. Is that all about making sure you have the right amount of power for the job?
You got it. It's all about matching the instance type to what you're actually doing. Some tasks need a ton of processing power, others need a lot of memory, some need specialized hardware.
So, like, I wouldn't use the same instance type for a small blog as I would for, say, a huge website, expecting a massive traffic spike during some big event.
Precisely. For that big event, you'd want an instance type that can handle a ton of requests at the same time, maybe one that's specifically designed for web applications or something like that.
This is where it starts to get really interesting because then the documentation goes on about AMIs and EBS volumes and security groups. Sounds like these are all key ingredients in making sure your EC2 setup is actually, going to work the way you want.
Exactly. Think of it like, well, AMIs are like blueprints, or maybe recipes is a better analogy. Like, you wouldn't bake a cake from scratch every time, right? AMIs are like pre-made cake mixes for your instances with the operating system and software already there.
So it's all about saving time and getting your instance up and running quickly. Makes sense.
Exactly. And then you've got EBS volumes, which are like, let's say external hard drives for your instances. They store your data. And the best part is, even if your instance shuts down for some reason, your data is safe and sound.
That's a huge relief. Data
Yeah.
security is a big deal. So what about these security groups then? Are those about controlling who or what can actually get to your instance and the data on it?
Precisely. Think of them like, those bouncers you see at clubs. They decide who gets in and who doesn't. Security groups act like firewalls. You define the rules about what traffic can go in and out of your instance.
So it's all about layers of protection, making sure that only the right people and applications have access to your stuff.
Exactly. And this is crucial because security in the cloud is paramount. Luckily, Amazon gives you a ton of tools and services to make sure your instances and your data are locked down tight. And speaking of services, one of the best things about EC2 is that it's not just a standalone thing. It works hand in hand with a whole bunch of other AWS services.
Right. That's what really caught my eye, the related services section. It seems like EC2 is just the tip of the iceberg.
It really is. It's like this whole ecosystem of tools. You can build some really incredible things when you start combining these services.
Yeah. So it's not just about the virtual machines themselves. It's about how they work with everything else. What are some of these must-know related services, the ones that we really need to have on our radar?
Well, one of the most powerful ones is Amazon EC2 auto scaling. Remember we were talking about different vehicles for different jobs?
Yeah.
Auto scaling is like having a fleet of vehicles that can magically grow or shrink depending on how much demand there is.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool. So if my website suddenly gets swamped with traffic,
Yeah.
auto-scaling could just spin up more instances
We
automatically.
got it. And if traffic drops off, it can scale back down to save you money. No need to manually manage everything.
That would be a game changer for sure, especially for businesses that have, those unpredictable spikes in activity. What other services are essential?
Two big ones that come to mind are AWS Backup and Amazon CloudWatch. Can't forget about those.
Okay, those sound pretty self-explanatory, but tell me more. What do they actually do?
So AWS Backup is exactly what it sounds like. It's a way to back up all your important stuff, like your EC2 instances, those EBS volumes we talked about, really any AWS resource you can think of. It's like having an industrial strength backup system for your entire cloud setup.
That makes me feel better already. Data security is so important, so knowing that those backups are there is a huge relief.
Right.
Okay, what about CloudWatch? Where does that fit into the picture?
Imagine you've got this mission control center for all your EC2 instances and everything else running on AWS. That's basically CloudWatch. It gives you this real-time view of how everything's performing, whether things are healthy or if something needs attention.
So I could use CloudWatch to track things like, I don't know, how much CPU my instances are using or how much network traffic they're handling, that sort of thing.
Exactly. It's all about visibility. You get all these dashboards and graphs. You can set up alerts so you know instantly if something's wrong. Like if your CPU usage suddenly spikes or you're running low on disk space, you'll get notified right away.
That is super helpful. It's like having a team of engineers constantly monitoring everything for you. This is all starting to sound incredibly powerful, but with great power comes, potentially a hefty bill. The documentation did mention different pricing models. Is cost management something we need to be thinking about seriously when it comes to EC2?
100%. I mean, don't get me wrong, EC2 can be amazingly cost-effective, especially when you compare it to setting up and maintaining your own physical servers and data centers. But you're right, you got to be smart about it. Understanding the different pricing models is key to not getting any nasty surprises on your bill.
Exactly. Cloud computing can be great, but it's not an excuse to just throw money at the problem. So what are some of the pricing models available, and how do we choose the right one?
So there are a few different ways you can go. One option is on-demand instances. With those, you basically pay as you go. By the second, no long-term commitments or anything like that. This is a good choice if you have short-term needs, like if your workloads are really unpredictable or if you just need something up and running quickly.
Sounds pretty flexible. What are the other options?
Well, if you know you're going to need a certain amount of computing power for a while, like a year or even 3 years, savings plans can save you a ton of money. You're basically committing to using a certain amount of EC2, and in exchange, you get a nice discount compared to the on-demand pricing. And then there are spot instances, which are kind of like getting a crazy discount on those last-minute flights.
Spot instances. Okay, now I'm really curious. Tell me more about those.
So with spot instances, you're basically bidding on spare EC2 capacity. Think of it like Amazon has all these extra servers just sitting around, and they're willing to rent them out at a steep discount. The catch is they can reclaim these instances with a little bit of notice if they need them back.
So it's like I could get this amazing deal on computing power, but then Amazon might come knocking and say, hey, we need that back now.
Yeah, exactly. But if your applications can handle that kind of interruption, like if they're designed to be fault tolerant or whatever, spot instances can be an amazing way to save money. We're talking potentially up to 90% cheaper than on demand.
Wow, that's significant. So if my applications can handle a little bit of uncertainty, spot instances could be a really good deal. Okay, so we've got all these different instances, services, pricing models. It sounds like Amazon has really thought of everything to make EC2 powerful and flexible and cost-effective. But with all that in mind, how do we actually get started? How difficult is it to actually jump in and start using this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it does seem a little overwhelming at first. But the documentation mentioned different ways of working with EC2. There's a web console and then a command line tools too, right?
Yeah.
So is there a right way to start, or does it depend on how tech savvy you are? That's the great thing about EC2. You can choose the approach that suits you best. If you're just starting out, the AWS Management Console is perfect. It's all visual, click and drag, very user-friendly, even if you're completely new to cloud computing.
So I can use a web browser. I can probably handle the management console.
Exactly. It's kind of like, using those website builders online. You don't need to know any code to get started. But if you do like to get your hands dirty with code, or if you need to automate things, then the AWS command line interface, the CLI, gives you a lot more power and flexibility.
So as I get more comfortable with EC2, I might want to explore the CLI and see what else I can do with it.
Exactly. It's like anything else. You can start with the basics and then gradually level up your skills.
So we've covered a lot of ground. Powerful instances, all these scalable services, cost optimization, different ways to interact with it all. Is there anything else that we haven't touched on yet, something that's really crucial to understanding why EC2 has become such a big deal in the tech world?
We talked about flexibility and scalability, but the real game changer with EC2 is the way it's enabling innovation. Think about things like machine learning, AI, big data analytics. These fields, they're exploding right now, and they need massive amounts of computing power, often with very specialized hardware.
And traditionally, that kind of power was out of reach for most companies, let alone individuals.
Exactly. But now, with EC2, anyone can access these incredible technologies without needing to invest millions of dollars in their own data centers.
So a small startup with a groundbreaking AI idea can compete with the big tech giants. They don't need to be held back by a lack of resources.
Precisely. It's really democratizing access to these technologies, and that's incredibly exciting.
It's amazing to think how much EC2 has changed the game. This deep dive has been eye-opening, to say the least. We went from the very basics of virtual servers and instances to this whole ecosystem of services and tools, and even talked about the future of technology and innovation. As we wrap things up here, is there one key takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with, something they should remember about Amazon EC2?
I think the most important thing to remember is that Amazon EC2 is more than just a cloud computing service. It's a catalyst for transformation. It's about breaking free from limitations, embracing flexibility, and realizing your full potential. So don't be afraid to experiment, dive in, and see what amazing things you can create.
That's a great note to end on. Thank you so much for guiding us through the world of Amazon EC2. It's been a fascinating journey. And to everyone listening, we hope this deep dive has inspired you to explore the power of cloud computing. Until next time.